Okay, so imagine this. You're the head of a major public institution that is known for being a center for research and innovation. Since it is a major world-class institution, lots of students want to go to your school. Well, therefore, you need to build more housing, right? One of these housing projects happens to be placed on a parcel where there's a historical park. Some neighbors get wind of your project. They band together and succeed, to a degree, in delaying it under this silly little law. This law is called, wait, hold on. Let's see, CEQA. CEQA? No, CEQA. Wait, oh, right, I remember now. CEQA.
CEQA stands for the California Environmental Quality Act. And it's a public disclosure law that has been around for over half a century. Being over 50 years old, this law still has a lot of controversy and misconceptions about it. Some of these extreme claims include that this intricate piece of legislation is the cause of the current housing crisis by denying every development that meets its deadly gaze. To, it's the only reason why the state's diverse ecology still exists, because it kills every development that meets its deadly gaze. Of course, these are major and extreme misconceptions because they are not true at all. First off, because CEQA can't stop the project as, and this is very important, it does not determine whether or not a project is approved. Moreover, out of all the CEQA projects within a given year, only a tiny fraction, less than 1%, go through litigation. If you scroll around YouTube or just Google CEQA, you meet either 3-minute unsubstantial political ads using it to reinforce their political agenda, or hour-long boring professional conference slideshows that no average person can comprehend. Therefore, I have decided to take on the insurmountable task of trying to simplify this behemoth of a law that affects every Californian's daily life, some more than others, yet is so mystified that many people just still don't care much about it. All in a multi-part series because there's so much to go over. But if you stay for all of it, I can assure you that you will be more factually informed about CEQA than your neighborhood, social network, NIMBY, or YIMBY will ever be, all in a more digestible way as well, unless they watch this series too. I hope you'll join me for this journey of Plansplaining CEQA.
CEQA.
California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA.
To be reformed,
used and abused in a way.
Okay, CEQA. So, the first important thing to understand about CEQA is, as stated before, it is a public disclosure law. Originally, this was meant to be a method of increasing governmental transparency by informing decision makers and the public about the potential environmental effects of proposed activities and to prevent significant avoidable environmental damage. What does that mean? It means that the law requires the project to disclose any potential substantial effects it may have on the environment, hence the disclosure part, and it brings science into this decision-making process. Again, it doesn't make a determination of whether or not a project is approved. CEQA, however, does these following things. It informs, it identifies, prevents, and discloses. It informs decision makers about the significant environmental effects of a project. It identifies environmental damage, which can be avoided.
With asterisks. It attempts to prevent damage by reducing or minimizing avoidable damage as best as it can via mitigations and alternatives. It can only prevent environmental damage outright through contextualizing the project for other environmental laws such as the Clean Water Act.
And it discloses to the public why the project is approved, even if it leads to environmental damage.
It also lays out the process, but doesn't dictate the outcome. In fact, the state has little interference when it comes to the process as the final decision is left to local government. Additionally, different jurisdictions have slight differences on how they carry out CEQA, meaning you can master the process in one county but become slightly lost if you attempt to do the same project in another one. Finally, it requires public involvement and discourse within its statutes. Of course, all of this only happens if the project is considered discretionary.
Okay, but what counts as discretionary?
Basically, any project that must undergo a decision-making process. Usually, it's a city council or board of supervisors that reviews these projects. These are people elected to local government. Of course, there's also a technical definition, but for now, just think of a discretionary project as one that must undergo a decision-making process. CEQA is different from other conventional planning laws. It is a public disclosure law that overlaps with environmental planning laws. While laws like zoning address planning issues specifically, CEQA treats each project as a unique case under environmental issues. It's just that planning intersects with how projects affect the environment, such as in traffic, land use, housing, etc. While a project triggers CEQA, it goes through a multitude of phases. While it's easy to just lump all these phases under CEQA, CEQA itself isn't one single process. To summarize the whole, the project goes through an initial study, which then determines whether the project itself needs to be further looked at or not. If it doesn't, it usually means the project doesn't affect the environment substantially enough, or it does, but the mitigation methods the project proposes to do will in some not affect the environment substantially. However, if the initial study finds that the project will create substantial environmental impacts, even with mitigation measures, then the project will go through a process known as the Environmental Impact Report, or EIR. This is what many people think when referring to CEQA. The EIR is comprised of a set of required sections that analyze environmental impacts from typical categories like greenhouse gases to less direct categories like aesthetics and archaeological resources.
Depending on the size and scope of a project, the EIR process may take a long time and require a variety of experts from biologists to historians in some cases. However, most CEQA projects last around 6 months at most. Unlike what some tend to believe, there is a time limit on everything. We'll go more into detail about all the processes in the future videos, but for now, this is as far as I'll go. Okay, so who is responsible for these processes? Well, I'm glad you asked. Let me consult my trusty land use law book here for the answer. And it says that the regulatory body, which is referred to as the lead agency, is responsible for the coordinating and going through the process. Under the definition of Public Resources Code 13.21067, lead agency means the public agency which has the principal responsibility for carrying out or approving a project, which may have a significant impact upon the environment. Thanks for that. So, what do I really mean? So it's a bit complicated if we think too hard about it. As I stated earlier, there are many parties that are involved with the impact analysis. But there is one agency that leads this effort, and this agency is called the lead agency. Wow, who would have thought?
The lead agency does the following things. It mitigates the reported effects through mitigation or additional conditions and justifies them as a result, and makes and decides CEQA determinations, usually through declarations. The lead agency is a discretionary authority, meaning it's usually, as stated before, a city, county, LAFCO, APCD, etc. Conventionally with lead agencies, the staff will prepare the reports, not the actual discretionary members. Often more times than not, the lead agency will hire a consulting firm to perform the work, as these discretionary agencies lack the staffing to complete the report in a timely manner.
So, obviously, all this requires money, which the lead agency will bill the applicant for. The applicant has no say in the process in addition when it comes to environmental analysis. If they did, it would be considered collusion, which is not good if you were wondering political and legally. Remember, CEQA is just there to disclose any environmental impact. And as a law, there has to be an enforcement mechanism. If it's not obvious already, these guidelines are binding to local governments. This means that they have to follow the rules strictly, or else. Well, there's no secret police, and since it's all local government, can't anyone just try to bypass it? No. Okay, so how are these things enforced? CEQA is enforced by the most scrutinizing governmental group ever. They're called Angry Citizens of California. Actually, it's specified to the residents of the project's jurisdiction, which makes sense. This means that the main enforcement method is through the local public commenting process, and in extreme cases, litigation.
You've probably heard of famous cases of large projects going through cost overshoots and major delays. Well, these happen when citizens have exhausted all non-legal options, also known as the exhaustion of all administrative remedies. This is a rare case and what gets covered by the news frequently when CEQA comes up. We'll go into detail about the litigation process later, but for now, remember that there's a limit as these suits must have a standing or legitimate reason. It's actually harder to sue than it seems. On top of citizen litigation, the state attorney general is able to force compliance in very extreme and rare circumstances. It doesn't happen a lot.
CEQA is like the Constitution in many ways. They both start with the letter C, and they both are living documents. This means the law and its interpretation is always changing. The rules are determined by 3 things. Number 1, state statutes. This is Public Resources Code 2100 to blah, 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 blah. State statutes are the law. They are enacted and modified by the state legislature. The second one are state guidelines. Guidelines are the primary rules and interpretations of CEQA. Guidelines, as in the name, give direction or a guide to public agencies carrying out CEQA, which include mandatory and optional directions. And court rulings are the third one, and the last one. Court rulings change rules through re-examining the interpretation of the statute, hence modifying the guidelines. However, while courts defer to the guidelines in most cases, they do not, and I quote, carry the same legal authority as the statute. So, if you learned anything about CEQA from this video, I hope, here are some key points to take away. Number 1, CEQA is a public disclosure law that's purpose is to disclose a project's environmental impacts. It's a planning law that intersects with the environmental realm. It is meant to help decision makers make determinations based on scientific evidence and to act as a form of government transparency when making these decisions. CEQA itself cannot deny or approve a project. This is the most important one, actually. In addition, the project must be considered discretionary to trigger CEQA. In addition, CEQA can only be enforced through civil means via citizen participation and in extreme cases, suits. However, these suits must have legal standing. The environmental process under which CEQA outlines can either be fast or long depending on the scope of the project and the amount of impact. There are multiple public agencies and parties involved with CEQA. However, these processes are mainly managed by the lead agency. Finally, CEQA is a living document, meaning that it is ever-changing based on court rulings, statutes, and guidelines. Well, that's all for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Next video, we'll be learning about the lore and implementation of CEQA. So, I'll see you then. Thanks. Can I get the stupid mic off?